What's up, guys? This is the Gospel According to Mark with a C. He is I, and I am he. Just taking some time to tell you exactly what's on my mind. Thank you for joining me once again, my friends. And as always, I invite you to like, to share, to subscribe. And when you subscribe, please hit the notification bell. And also, thank you in advance to anyone who does give to the Super Thanks feature that's on this video. It highlights your comment, and I'll respond to your comment. I really do appreciate it. You guys know I don't do a weekly stream on this channel, though one day I'd like to get to that point where I do. So any help that you give is definitely appreciated. That's the reason why I talk it up. So, okay, guys, let's get into the topic of this video, okay? We're going to talk about the whole Kenobi thing. Now, you guys know the fandom has been like under attack ever since this thing got started, because we're not allowed to critique it, we're not allowed to criticize it, and the fans who are critical of it have been categorized as being racist, sexist, you know, just everything that you can name, but they don't really spend a whole lot of time actually addressing the valid criticisms, definitely not the valid criticisms of black viewers such as myself. So let's get into this, because what I wanted to point out, right, where I think the breakdown is that I don't feel that Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars is particularly knowledgeable about this property that they've taken control of. I've said from the very beginning that I believe that Disney is just a terrible fit for Star Wars. Now, of course, recently we had the news that writer, showrunner Joe B. Harris was talking about how he didn't really know much about what Obi-Wan Kenobi knew going into this particular phase of his life and his story, okay? And this would be your writer, showrunner, okay? So he didn't know. He didn't watch any of the previous stuff. He didn't do any of the, any of the research or anything like that. He had to go to Pablo Hidalgo to find out. But he himself, as a writer, as a showrunner, to me, that's inexcusable. So when you have that type of dynamic, right, and you find yourself presenting your product to an audience of people, because Star Wars is not like anything else. Star Wars fans, a lot of us are incredibly knowledgeable. That's the reason why I call a lot of us scholars. So when you get control of this and you have to present it to people who this is practically their religion, their Bible, then you know that there's going to be some issues here, right? Now, I have this story here because there's been a whole lot of talk about Moses Ingram and the reception that she's gotten. And I just want to put this in the bigger context of what I think the problem is here, with Star Wars and the ones who are in creative control versus the fans who actually have standards, okay? Because there are some fans out there, like I said before, and the only thing they care about is just it's good. Any Star Wars is good Star Wars. It's just good to get new content. That's all we care about. But there's a large section of the fandom where we do have standards, and we realize that Star Wars is supposed to be the pinnacle of sci fantasy. You know what I mean? Like, this is supposed to be it. There is none better. It's like when Run DMC says, I'm the king of rock. There is none higher. There is none higher than Star Wars. So that expectation has to be maintained and it has to be met. But over and over again, we're told to lower your expectations. No, that's not. They're missing the whole point. Okay, but getting back to Moses Ingram, all right? I have this article here, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it, and this was in NME. Okay, never heard of it, NME.com. Just a little piece of it, because this illustrates what I'm talking about, okay? So she's talking about her experience and her exuberance with picking up the role of... Okay, so it says here, typically, when you speak to new cast members of Star Wars projects, they'll tell you how they grew up obsessed with the movies and how this is a dream come true. This is what I was talking about before, okay? It's a lie. They all say the same thing before they take a great big hearty dump on the property, right? But it says here, not Ingram. She knew very little about Star Wars before she was cast. And she says, I honestly just found out what a Jedi mind trick was in making this show. She laughs. I always knew what people meant by a Jedi mind trick. I just didn't know it was attached to Star Wars. I hadn't seen the films. Okay. Once again, I honestly just found out what a Jedi mind trick was in making this show. She laughs. I always knew what people meant by a Jedi mind trick. I just didn't know it was attached to Star Wars. I hadn't seen the films. All right, guys, see, this is what I'm talking about. Now, listen, I'm not saying that an actor needs to know everything about what they're doing. I mean, they're hired to do a job. An actor is supposed to act. Okay, it falls primarily on the writers to make this thing credible, to make it work. So I'm not going to blame her necessarily for just not knowing, but like I said before, like Star Wars is a very particular property. It's a very particular phenomenon. Like, I really do feel this is the reason why when we cite that fan films tend to be better and more fulfilling when you watch the fan films of Star Wars or Star Trek, is because the creators of these things actually know. They go in with a passion, and passion matters, even down to the actors. Writing, number one, but actors have to bring a certain passion, a certain commitment to it. So if you just had no concept of it whatsoever, and you just didn't know, and this is just a job for you, it makes it a lot harder. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but it makes it a lot harder for you to pull off and succeed with what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so it says here, okay, I hadn't seen the films. And it goes on to say, she was aware of the films, of course, because she did not grow up on another planet. But actually, she did grow up on another planet. She grew up on another planet far from the universe that George Lucas created, and it does help. But like I said, all of us who are invested in this, in our minds, we invested in that world. We took a trip to that world. And I talked about this before. When they said a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, the Star Wars fan decided to take that trip to that galaxy, to transport our imagination there. We were of that world. We believed in that world. When you talk about world building, this is what we're talking about. So you just can't dismiss that world and that world building and that continuity and that lore, because that smacks your Star Wars fan in the face. But that's the way it is today. We're told to forget, stop nitpicking, they say. Stop remembering the old stuff. Forget the past. Kill it if you have to. That's the order of the day. All right. So, okay. But beyond knowing the names of major characters, she was largely clueless on Star Wars lore. No, you don't say. But the problem is, once again, Joby Harold is the same way, and everybody else who was around him who didn't check him on these things, including Ewan McGregor, who is executive producer, who should know because he didn't just watch those movies. I would assume he starred in them as well. Unfortunately, because the show begins 10 years after the events of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Ingram's education... Oh my God, listen to this part. Unfortunately, because the show begins 10 years after the events of Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Ingram's education had to begin with the worst Star Wars trilogy, the prequels. Yeah, it actually says that. The worst Star Wars trilogy, the prequels. All right, let's stop fucking around here, guys. All right. The worst Star Wars so-called trilogy was the sequel trilogy, okay? It was objectively, narratively bad all around, okay? When you break it down, when you talk about the plot, the pacing of it, the development of characters, objectively, the sequel trilogy was absolute dog shit. Okay, the prequel trilogy, by comparison, was a masterpiece. Now, of course, it wasn't a critical darling at the time, but like I said before, for those of us who understood George Lucas's vision, his imagination, we knew what he was going for. Of course, we appreciated it. It gave us some of the best lightsaber fights ever. It gave us some great development, the continuity, the way it fit with the OT. Listen, it wasn't perfect, but we do love it. Okay, so this whole the worst trilogy stuff, that's some bullshit, okay? So it was, and she goes on to say, it was most pertinent to know where we were in this story. So the prequels were definitely my Bible while we were working. I don't believe it. I don't believe she ever watched any part of Star Wars. And of course, like I said before, because she's an actor, maybe she doesn't have to. Maybe the burden is not on her. Now, but where the breakdown comes in, right? I don't expect her to know everything, okay? But where the breakdown comes in is that, like I said from the very beginning, you are presenting this, of all things, Star Wars, not like anything else, okay? Star Wars, you're presenting this to a group of people who know this stuff backwards and front. So when we do call you out on certain errors and continuity and breaks of the lore and things like that, what shouldn't happen is we shouldn't be the subject of a bunch of aggression and a bunch of insults, that tend to happen here, because you knew going in, you didn't know this stuff. You think that you would hire consultants, and I ain't talking about that dickhead Pablo Hidalgo, I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about people who are really passionate, who really care, not just about the property in Star Wars, but also Star Wars fans who can address our very real concerns without leveling these accusations against us that we're racist and we're sexist and we're homophobe and all of that stuff. All of that is unnecessary. The points that we bring up are legitimate. But because of the fact that you have people who really don't know this stuff, that's their only defense, to drench all of their publicity and everything in scandal, to go against the fans. That's what the problem is. And I'm sorry, but this brings up a very real possibility of maybe the need to have some form of gatekeeping when it comes to this, where the creatives, they do actually look at people's qualifications, just like any other job that you go on. They want to know what your experience is. What are your qualifications? It seems that there are no qualifications, especially when it comes to writing. Like I said, with the actors, it's different, but it's just the way the actor's responsibility, I believe, is in how they relate themselves to the public. I do believe that the concept of having public relations people have been lost, with this whole thing. They should be telling these people how you're supposed to present yourself to your audience in interviews. When you look at interviews of Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, you'd be surprised how well they carry themselves, considering they were so young when this whole thing first started. They didn't know what they were getting into and all that stuff. But even on their level, they seem to have more regard for the fans that they were accumulating at that time, because Star Wars wasn't the phenomenon when they started that it is today. But still, they did take it seriously. Even though Harrison Ford believed it was hokey dialogue and all that stuff, he was professional. He didn't insult the fans that way, okay? Now, later on, we can have that conversation. But I'm just talking about back then when they just got started. You know what I mean? So here's another example, guys, and I just wanted to do a quick one to point that out. Moses Ingram, who they say they want to sell as being under fire and everything. She didn't know anything about this. So when she gets into the public eye and she starts talking about how you can have droids and all of these things, but if you don't have any black people in there, she doesn't know. And this is the reason why also in another interview, they were asking her, well, did you ask John Boyega how he dealt with it? She didn't see any of the films. I remember joking at the time. She probably doesn't even know who John Boyega is. Now, I'm thinking maybe that's not a joke. She probably didn't, because she just said she didn't see any of the films. You know what I mean? So there it is, guys. I believe that this is where the breakdown is. You have people who have no passion, and it ends up translating onto the screen, because if Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars is not an example of a property these days that has no passion and is soulless, then I've never seen one. So, okay, guys, you can get in the comment section and let me know how you feel about this. As always, like I said before, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for the donations. And as always, I love you. I'll catch you on the next one. This is The Gospel According to Mark with a C. Rock on.